Hi, my name is Bianca and I am 37 years old. 6 months ago, in one single, merciless, and indifferent moment, my entire familiar, measured, and seemingly reliable world collapsed like a house of cards under the icy wind of fate, leaving me with no support, no opportunity to breathe freely, not even a shadow of my former confidence in the future. I had been married to David, my life partner, my support, my friend, my husband for 15 years. He was 39 years old and worked in a bank, a serious and responsible job that valued precision, patience, and attention to detail, traits he possessed in abundance and for that very reason was respected there, but perhaps more than anything else in the world, with the exception, of course, of our small, close, and cozy family, which included me and our son Tommy. He loved fishing, the kind where a person is alone with nature, with the mirror-like surface of the water, with the morning silence broken only by the splash of fish, and with his own thoughts. Tommy, our boy, was 12 years old at the time, smart beyond his years, reasonable and attentive to detail. He got straight A's in school, and in his free time from school he played in a children's baseball league, where, despite his fragile physique, he showed remarkable ingenuity and team spirit. We lived in a nice house, not luxurious, but cozy and warm, a house that was truly ours, suffered through, filled with our memories, voices, and smells. The smells of dinners, baked cookies, and freshly washed linen. David, among other things, had an apartment in the city center, inherited from his grandmother, the one that smelled of antique furniture, book dust, and the scent of jasmine, and which we did not need, since our house met all our needs. We allowed my younger sister Emma and her husband David, with whom we had a good and warm relationship, to live there for free while they saved up for their own place. After all, family always helps family, right? And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy. Emma, 3 years younger than me, was an emotional person, sometimes a little naive, but infinitely kind, and I was sincerely happy when 2 years ago she married David, a quiet, calm man who worked at a car dealership, a man without particular ambitions, but with a kind heart and hard work, whom I confess I considered a worthy match for my sister, who until then could not find a man with whom she could be happy for a long time. Emma worked as an administrator in a dental office, and together they did not earn as much as they would have liked, so the offer to live in an apartment rent-free was a real salvation for them, and I was glad that David and I could afford it. My parents, Leonardo and Giada, lived only 20 minutes away from us. My dad had recently retired after many years of service at the post office, and my mother worked in a library until last year, when she finally retired. They were in their 60s. And I always thought that we had a good, if not always cloudless, but honest and friendly relationship. I called them regularly, helped with groceries when needed, and did small repairs around the house, especially during periods when Dad's arthritis worsened. That January day, that same Saturday, began like hundreds of others before it. David woke up early, full of impatience and joy from the anticipation of the morning fishing with Tommy. They had been talking about it all week, discussing gear, bait, even the schedule, because the weather promised to be ideal. No strong wind, no frost, clear skies, and a light fog over Cedar Lake, their favorite place. They left at 8 in the morning, and I remember watching them from the doorway, waving, feeling grateful for the family I had, for the way Tommy was laughing in the car, for the way David stopped for a second to blow me a kiss, and I thought, it's all good, it's all going to be all right. The day went by in the usual chores. I cleaned, did the laundry, went grocery shopping, sat at the counter, planning my budget, and by 5, with the radio tuned to our favorite station, I started making dinner, chicken and veggies and a baked potato. Knowing the boys would be hungry after fishing. 6 in the evening, no call, no sound. 7, I called David, but it went straight to voicemail, which didn't seem odd. The reception was often spotty at the lake. By 8, I was starting to feel uneasy, but I told myself they had simply lost track of time, or perhaps the engine had stalled. When the doorbell rang at 8:47, I glanced at my watch automatically, surprised that someone would be home at such an hour, and thought it might be a neighbor. But when I opened the door and saw 2 police officers, in uniform, with tense faces and a reserved wariness, my heart sank instantly, and I knew this visit was no small matter. "Are you Bianca DeRosa?" the older one asked, a tall man with Spanish features, his voice calm, like a doctor delivering a grave diagnosis. I just nodded. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Chen. May I come in?" I let them in, feeling my legs buckle, my breathing become ragged, my mind refused to accept reality. We walked into the living room, and I sat in a chair, and Officer Rodriguez sat across from me, a notebook in his lap. "Mrs. DeRosa, I'm so sorry to tell you, but your husband and son were in a serious car accident this evening." The words hit me like an icy hammer, tearing through my insides, leaving me gasping for breath. "Are they okay? Where are they?" I whispered, clutching at air, at hope, at salvation. Rodriguez looked at his notebook. "The accident happened around 6:15 p.m. on Route 34, about 5 miles from Cedar Lake. A drunk driver ran a red light and struck the driver's side of your truck." I could hear my heart pounding, the blood draining from my face. "Are they alive?" I managed to choke out. "Your husband was pronounced dead at the scene. I'm so sorry." The world went silent. I heard the words, but they made no sense, like a draft blowing through an empty room where only the echoes of a former life remained. David was dead? It was impossible, implausible, at odds with the very sense of reality in which, just a few hours earlier, he had kissed me goodbye, grabbed a thermos of coffee, laughed at my joke, and winked at me before promising to bring home the catch of the century because, as he put it, the fish were definitely going to bite like crazy today. He was supposed to come back, tell me how many walleyes he had caught on his favorite bait, how Tommy had almost fallen in trying to land the first bream, how the sun had slid across the water and the seagulls had screamed over the lake. It was all supposed to happen. It was all part of the plan. What about Tommy? I managed to squeeze out, as if my voice was breaking through the cotton wool enveloping my thoughts. "Your son is alive, but in critical condition," Officer Rodriguez said quietly, as if he were afraid that the loud words would destroy me completely. "He suffered multiple injuries, including a severe head injury. He was taken to St. Mary's Hospital and is now in surgery." I barely remember what happened after those words, as if my consciousness had separated from my body, leaving it to act. Automatically, I remember Officer Chen helping me into the police car, looking out the window, not seeing the road, the houses, the streetlights, and Officer Rodriguez following us in my car, saying he would leave the keys at the information desk later. Everything in the hospital was fast and yet infinitely slow, the linoleum waiting rooms with the smell of hand sanitizer, the doctors in green coats, the sliding doors, the strange, heavy words that made you want to cover yourself with your hands. Traumatic brain injury, induced coma, dangerous situation. When I was finally allowed to see Tommy, I barely recognized my living, active boy in that immobilized body. He seemed too small, too fragile in the huge hospital bed surrounded by monitors and pulsating tubes, as if he had been transported to some alien, cold, scary world. His head was wrapped in a tight white bandage, his face was swollen, and purple bruises were forming on his cheekbones and forehead. The doctor, a young woman with serious eyes named Martinez, explained with restraint and professional clarity that they had managed to reduce the intracranial pressure. But it was still impossible to predict when and whether he would wake up at all. I nodded as if I understood what she was talking about, although in reality there was a buzzing in my head, and the only thought that did not leave me was, "Tommy can't die, he shouldn't." I stayed in the hospital, settling into an uncomfortable chair next to his bed, and only around midnight, with trembling hands, I dialed my mother's number. She answered only on the third ring, her voice sleepy and a little irritated. "Bianca, it's almost midnight, what happened?" "Mom," I breathed out, but I couldn't finish because my throat tightened and I began to cry, like a person who can't hold on any longer. "Darling, what happened?" came the anxious voice. "David," I managed to whisper, "he's dead, Tommy in a coma." There was silence on the other end of the line, a long, drawn-out moment, and then Mom said, "Oh my God, Bianca, we'll be there soon." But they didn't come right away, not until the next morning, when the sun was already high in the sky, filling the hospital corridors with an inappropriately bright light. They were tired, a little irritated, as if the journey and the early rise had been a great feat for them. Dad hugged me awkwardly, as if he was forcing himself, and Mom patted me on the shoulder and quickly moved on to questions. How it all happened, what the doctors were saying, when would we know if Tommy would come out of the coma. They stayed with us for only an hour, and then, looking at each other, said they had to go home because they had some important calls to make. "We'll help you with the funeral arrangements," Mom said before leaving, "Don't worry about a thing." But the next day, when I plucked up my courage and called to discuss the date, the place, the ritual details, Mom's voice sounded different, distant, cool. As if a wall had grown between us in those few hours. "Actually, dear, we can't help with the arrangements. You see, Emma and David are moving into David's apartment this week, and we promised to help them get settled in." I froze, not believing what I was hearing. "But Mom, David just died. The funeral is more important than helping them move in." "Of course it is," she said quickly, but there was no apology in her voice. "It's just that we've already made that commitment. And you know how Emma gets when plans fall through. We'll be at the funeral, of course we will, but we can't help with the planning." I hung up, feeling my heart squeeze in a dull, sticky ache. My husband was dead, my son was in a coma, and my family was more concerned with moving the furniture. I was left to handle David's funeral arrangements alone, calling the funeral home, choosing the flowers, ordering the casket, talking to the officiant, deciding how and where it would all take place. I made my decisions alone, in a void where there was no support, no consolation, no sympathy. My parents, Emma and David, came at the very last moment, sat silently through the entire ceremony, and then left just as silently, without staying a minute longer. After David died, all his property passed to me. Our house, which still smelled of his cologne, his old books lay on the nightstand, and his cup stood in the dryer, the apartment in the center, where Emma and David now lived, as if nothing had changed, and a bank account with $800,000. David was a careful and prudent man. He saved, he invested wisely, and he had an excellent insurance policy. This was the only thing that gave me any support. I was financially protected. I decided to take a part-time job at my accounting firm. Work was no longer a priority. I wanted to be around Tommy as much as possible. The doctor said that coma patients sometimes hear familiar voices. From that day on, I read aloud to him every day, starting with Harry Potter, his favorite Wizarding World, then adventure novels, short stories, even his homework. "Your teacher says you're doing great in math," I'd say, sitting by his bed, holding his hand, which was covered in bandages. "She's saving all your work, waiting for you to come back." I told him everything, the games he'd missed, the news from school, the silly TV shows we used to watch together. I told him about his father, how proud he'd be to know how bravely Tommy fought. But Tommy never responded. His breathing was regular, his pulse steady, his skin warm as a sleeping child. But in all those long, agonizing months he never squeezed my hand back, never moved a finger, never opened an eye, as if his soul had lost its way somewhere between worlds and could not find its way back. The doctors were kind, patient, and sympathetic, but they were realists. They knew better than anyone the value of hope that day after day poisons the heart of those who wait for a miracle. And so they told me what they had to tell me. With brain damage as severe as Tommy's, miracles are extremely rare, and a happy ending is almost always an exception. 6 months passed, half a year of gray, identical days, in which every morning began with work, where I, overcoming the inner emptiness, looked through reports, checked figures, answered letters, and then hurried to the hospital, where I sat for hours at my son's bedside, read aloud to him, told him about my life, about what was happening outside, as if this could pull him out of the depths into which he had fallen. And in the evenings I returned to the empty house, where the silence seemed to ring in my ears. Meanwhile, Emma and David had settled in quite comfortably in the apartment that David and I had once considered unnecessary, simply because we already had a house. Sometimes they would call, lazily thank us for the opportunity, talk about how convenient it was to live in the center, where everything was close by: work, shops, cafes. But at the same time they never bothered to ask how Tommy was feeling, and did not offer a minute of help, either moral or practical. During these 6 months, my parents visited their grandson exactly 3 times. Each time, their visit lasted no more than 20 minutes, during which Mom managed to express general words of sympathy, Dad to mumble something unintelligible, and then invariably followed the same thing. "Hospitals make me nervous," Mom would say, rubbing her hands, as if the ward smelled of something particularly unpleasant, and Dad would invariably recall that his arthritis is getting worse and he needed to lie down. They left, leaving me alone in this silent battle, where every day I was losing, but I had no right to give in. And then, on an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday in July, when the sun was beating down through the office blinds, and I, as usual, was reviewing quarterly reports, the phone rang. Dr. Martinez's name appeared on the screen, and my heart immediately sank, because I knew she never called without reason. Mrs. DeRosa, this is Dr. Martinez from St. Mary's Hospital. I need you to come immediately. I didn't ask a single question, didn't even bother to fold up any papers. I just grabbed my bag, ran to the car and drove. Dr. Martinez was waiting for me in the hallway outside Tommy's room, and I immediately knew from her face, from her downcast eyes, from the tense lips that it was all over. Mrs. DeRosa, I'm so sorry. Tommy passed away about an hour ago. His body just couldn't fight anymore. The words hit me like a blow, not a metaphor but a physical, almost tangible pain. As if my chest had been torn apart from the inside, I recoiled, instinctively clutching the cold tile wall to steady myself, and Dr. Martinez continued to speak quietly, carefully, with that professional sorrow that makes news final. Sometimes with such serious injuries the brain doesn't give a signal, but the body holds on and then just gives up. There was nothing more we could do. I'm so sorry. I walked into the room as if into a temple, step by step approaching the bed where my son lay, and hugged him one last time. He looked peaceful, his face calm, even bright, as if he were sleeping, and only the complete stillness reminded me that this sleep was eternal. I stroked his hair, whispered how much I loved him, told him that I was proud of him, that David was waiting for him, that everything would be fine if only he would open his eyes, say something, but he was silent. My baby was gone. A few days later, I returned to an empty house, and sat for hours on the floor, leaning against the wall, sobbing until there were no more tears, until my throat was dry, and my mind turned into an empty, scorched desert. When I had recovered a little, I picked up the phone and dialed my parents. Mom, Tommy died today. There was a pause, and then a flat, emotionless voice. Oh, Bianca, I'm so sorry to hear that. No tremors, no grief, no emotion, just a matter-of-fact statement. It wasn't the voice of a grandmother who had lost her grandson. I need help with the funeral arrangements, I said, clinging to the possibility that maybe now they would stand by my side. I can't do this alone again. Well, that would be a problem, Mom said without hesitation. We can't help you with that, and we won't be able to attend the funeral. I thought I'd misheard. What? We're flying to Mexico tomorrow with Emma and David. It's a family vacation. We've been planning it for months. Mom, my son just died. Your grandson has died. Of course, you can reschedule. No way, she snapped, her voice cold. Do you have any idea how much money we spent? $8,000. The vouchers don't transfer. If we cancel, it's all gone. The money just disappears. I couldn't believe my ears. You're choosing a vacation over Tommy's funeral? I asked, already knowing the answer but hoping she'd come to her senses. Bianca, you're a strong woman, you can handle it. Just like David's funeral, you don't really need us there. And she hung up. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something inside me tear apart, like someone had punched me in the stomach, taking the air away, leaving only emptiness. Before I could recover, the phone rang again. It was Emma. Bianca, Mom just called, she said, without even saying hello. Look, I'm so sorry about Tommy, but there's no way we're canceling this trip. There was no regret in her voice, just irritation, as if I was ruining her mood with my grief. Emma, this is Tommy's funeral. He's your nephew. His death is your problem, not mine, she snapped. I'm pregnant, okay? This may be my last chance to relax and have fun before the baby is born. I've been looking forward to this trip for months, and I'm not canceling it because of your son's death. I was so shocked by her cruelty, her icy, detached nonchalance, that for a moment I simply couldn't speak, couldn't even comprehend that such words, such abrupt indifference, could come from the person with whom I had shared my entire childhood, from the sister I had once hugged when she cried over her unhappy high school romances. You have no right to demand that we cancel our vacation, Emma continued with an irritated insistence, as if I were asking her to donate a kidney rather than just to show basic humanity. We've already paid for everything, and I need this break, so solve your own problems and leave us alone. And with that, she cut the conversation short, hung up the phone with such ease as if we were talking about some banal domestic dispute and not the death of my child. I sat in the living room, in complete silence, only the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room reminding me that the world went on, that someone, somewhere, was cooking dinner, playing with children, laughing, and in 10 minutes, In one phone call and one short conversation, my family had made it clear that vacation, the beach, the lounge chairs, the cocktails, and the bathing suits were more important to them than the dead boy who had once called them aunt and grandma, who had drawn them holiday cards and laughed at them on sunny days. And in that moment, in that absolute silence, in that enveloping solitude, I suddenly felt something I hadn't felt in months: clarity, not a flash of anger, not blind rage, not a desire to destroy, but a cold, clear, crystal clear clarity, as if a thick fog had suddenly lifted in my head, revealing to me what had always been obvious: I was alone, and I could do this alone. For the first time since David's truck had crashed, my mind was sharply clear, focused, collected. I knew what I had to do. First, I would bury my son, then I would take care of my family. I called Sarah, the friend who had stayed by my side through the grief, through my isolation and my infrequent responses. She arrived 20 minutes later with a notepad, a bottle of water, and a hug that was warmer than anything my family had said in the past 6 months. Together, we planned Tommy's funeral. As with David, I made all the decisions, from the wreaths to the music, from the gravesite to the pastor's words. Only this time, I had no illusions, no expectations that my family would show up, no hope that they would help or even pretend to care. Tommy's funeral was held on Thursday morning. It was a quiet, modest service, without fanfare but with love. It was just me, Sarah, a few of David's co-workers who remembered Tommy from the company picnics where he'd run between the ice cream tables and laugh, and Mrs. Rodriguez, his high school teacher, who'd driven an hour just to say goodbye. The pastor spoke softly, with kindness in his voice, talking about how Tommy was now reunited with his father in heaven, and I tried to hold on to that thought, to imagine them together again, fishing on some heavenly lake, laughing like before. I didn't cry during the service. All the tears were cried in the quiet of my bedroom, on the kitchen floor, in the stuffy hospital room. Instead, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sense of peace, as if I were watching from the outside rather than from the inside, as if someone else was burying my son. As the casket was lowered into the ground next to David's grave and the damp earth began to fall from above, I stood there, looking ahead, and thought of only one thing. At that very moment, in the other hemisphere, my family, blood of my blood, was splashing in the salt water of Mexico, posing against the backdrop of palm trees and posting pictures of their cocktails on the internet. After the funeral, Sarah, understanding without words, offered to stay with me, but I refused. I needed to be alone, I had things to do, and I needed to do them myself. The first thing I did was go downtown, to the apartment that was rightfully mine, but where Emma and David now lived, as if it were a gift from heaven. I had a key, of course. I had never given it away, because I knew that this day would come someday. I walked in and looked around. The apartment was clean, cozy, lived in like a family. Pillows, photographs, tea towels, the smell of Emma's perfume and some spicy lotion. I didn't hesitate. I started packing things, everything: clothes, books, cosmetics, frying pans, their stupid souvenirs, and even that ugly fringed lamp that David's mother had given them for their housewarming. I packed it all into boxes, into garbage bags, working silently, methodically, quickly, like a surgeon operating. Knowing that the less you think, the easier it is to breathe. It took me almost 3 hours. Everything that made up their comfort, their little world, was now lying in piled up boxes. I called a moving company, paid them double the rate so that they would come that day, and then, remembering the spare key to my parents' house that my mother had given me 15 years ago in case of trouble, I sent the movers there. I didn't stand on ceremony. I didn't straighten it out. I didn't stack it neatly. I ordered everything to be dumped in a heap right on the carpet in the living room, let them sort it out. Then I called a locksmith. New bolt, new handle, new keys. Emma's and David's keys no longer fit. The apartment was mine again, and none of them would ever enter it again without my permission. When I got home, sat down at my laptop, and opened my online banking, I felt the old, naive Bianca who believed love didn't have to be paid for with cash peeling away with every click. I started canceling the automatic payments one by one. Years of help, support, kindness, all of it now turning into numbers on a screen. My parents' car insurance, cancelled. Their healthcare copay, cancelled. Dad's favorite woodworking magazine, no longer coming. Mom's Netflix subscription, which I paid for Because she always forgot the password, was cancelled, the monthly transfer to their credit card for purchases was stopped, Emma's phone, disconnected. Her car payment, which I'd been covering since she got married, was cancelled, even her gym membership, which I'd once given her for her wedding, was cancelled. With every cancellation, with every click that severed another invisible financial tie to the people who called themselves my family, I was reminded of why I started paying for all of this in the first place, not because they asked me to, but because I believed it was what people in love did, how they cared, how they supported each other, how they felt together. The car insurance came when my dad retired and every dollar counted, and I'd added it to the monthly bill without thinking, just to make it easier on them. The phone bill came when Emma graduated from college and struggled to find a steady job, broke, and unable to answer calls unless she was in a Wi-Fi zone. The car payment was a wedding gift. I wanted to help them build their credit, as I said encouragingly, since they weren't quite on their feet yet. I was so generous to my family, so eager to help them when they were truly in trouble. Because I believed in kinship, in unity, in that naive idea that love is expressed not in words but in deeds. I paid for Emma's entire wedding, $23,000, spent not with reproach, not with looking back, but with the desire to give her the day she dreamed of, the perfect ceremony that she would remember for the rest of her life. When my mother complained last year of headaches and old, scratched glasses, I took her to the best eye doctor in town and bought her new lenses without waiting for her to ask. When my father's truck broke down, I took it to the repair shop, paid for the repairs, and silently handed over the keys, without expecting a thank you. Now, looking at line after line of cancelled auto payments, I suddenly realized that I had been giving them about $3,000 every month, year after year, for 4 years in a row, more than $140,000 spent on the welfare of people who could not find the strength to come to my son's funeral. As I was realizing this, my phone vibrated with a stream of notifications. I didn't want to look, but I opened the screen anyway, and a parade of images from Mexico appeared before me. Emma and David on the beach, tanned, smiling, hugging under palm trees, drinking from pineapples. My parents, in white, sitting in a restaurant overlooking the ocean, raising glasses of cocktails, smiling at the camera, and in the middle of all these images, a caption under a photo of Emma. So grateful to be here with my amazing family, who support me in everything. I took screenshots of every photo, every signed line, saved them in a separate folder because I wanted to remember this moment, not for revenge, not for judgment, but for myself, as confirmation, final and irrefutable, of who these people really were, not who I imagined them to be, but who they showed themselves to be. 3 days passed, I went to work again, came home, cooked dinner for one, sat by the window and waited. I knew that they would soon return from their well-deserved rest, and I waited impatiently for their return, for the first time in many months feeling that I was in control of something again, that I was holding the steering wheel of my life in my hands again, and not just sitting in the passenger seat, meekly watching the destruction. On Sunday evening, the phone rang. First my parents called, then Emma, then David, then my parents again. I did not answer a single call. I was sitting in the living room, sorting through Tommy's things to donate, touching his shirts, his baseball caps, his sneakers he'd worn running around the yard, and the phone kept ringing like an alarm. An hour later, the voicemail came on. First, my mother's voice, angry, arrogant, loud. Bianca, what have you done to Emma's apartment? Why is all their stuff here? Call me back right now. Then Emma, almost screaming, what the hell is wrong with you? We can't get into the apartment, all our stuff is gone. Call me back or I'll call the police. Then David, trying to sound reasonable, hi, Bianca, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please call us back so we can clear this up. Dad left the last. Bianca, honey, our house is a big mess, please explain what happened. I deleted all the voicemails without listening to the end, then went into my phone settings and blocked all their numbers, but they didn't give up. Around 10 o'clock, I heard cars pulling up to the house, headlights flashed past the window. And a moment later, a loud, impatient knock on the door broke the silence. Bianca, open that door right now. Emma screamed. I looked out the window and saw all 4 of them standing on my porch, my mother, father, Emma, and David. They looked irritated, tired from the long flight, and completely unaware that their arrival had not caused me the slightest excitement. Emma pounded her fist on the door, demanding that I open it. I took a deep breath and walked forward. knowing that this conversation had to happen whether I wanted it or not. I was ready for it. I opened the door slowly and looked at them. Emma flushed with anger. David stood a little to the side, shifting awkwardly. My parents avoided my gaze, as if they already regretted having come. "We need to talk," Mom said, walking past me into the house, as if she still had the right to do so. The others followed her and stood frozen in my living room, looking at me like I was a criminal who had committed an act of betrayal. "What the hell did you do?" Emma was snapping, her hands on her hips, her voice shaking with anger. "Our things are scattered all over Mom and Dad's house like trash, and we can't get into our apartment." I looked at her calmly, without a trace of emotion, and said, "This isn't your apartment anymore. I changed the locks. You're being evicted." Emma froze, her jaw dropped, her eyes filled with anger. "You can't evict us. We have rights," she screamed. "Actually, I can," I said quietly but firmly. "The apartment is mine. I inherited it when David died. You lived there on my permission. That permission has been revoked." Emma took a step toward me, her eyes narrowed in anger. "Look, I know you're upset about Tommy, but that doesn't give you the right to ruin our lives. We have nowhere to go. You should have thought of that before you told me that my son's death was my problem, not yours," I said with icy clarity, feeling a chill spread across my skin, not from anger, but from a final, deep certainty of my right, my truth, my actions. A deafening silence fell over my living room, so thick that it seemed I could hear the old wall clock in the hallway ticking away, and how every second cut off the remnants of our so-called kinship, breaking ties that had once seemed unbreakable. Emma stood there in a stupor, her eyes wide, her lips trembling, and for a moment I thought she was about to sink into the ground, disappear into that awkward, heavy silence. She knew what she had said to me, she remembered it exactly, every word, spoken in that sharp, irritated voice, when she had no time for my grief, no time for my son, no time for my pain. I was upset, she mumbled weakly, trying to find an excuse. "I didn't mean it. You said my son's death was my problem, not yours," I reminded her, keeping my voice low. "You said you needed to rest before the baby was born, and that Tommy's funeral wasn't important enough to cancel your vacation for." My mother, who had been standing silently to the side, took a step forward, trying to intervene, looking at me reproachfully, that icy maternal tone I remembered from my childhood flashing in her eyes. "Bianca, you're going too far," she said, straightening up. "We know you're upset, but that's not how families talk to each other." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because at that moment her words sounded especially absurd. "Family? She thinks we're family? Family?" I asked. "Do you really think we're family?" "Of course we are," my father quickly interjected, his voice surprisingly soft, almost pleading. "We've had our difficulties, but we'll get through this." Emma, who had been standing there with flushed cheeks and tear-swollen eyes, suddenly perked up and looked at me with a nervous glint in her eyes. "Now I get it," she said, straightening up. "You've taught me a lesson, I get it. Now you can give me new keys to the apartment. Right?" "No," I said simply, her face lengthened, her lips trembled. "What do you mean, no?" "It means my decision is final. You don't live in my apartment anymore. Find another place." Emma squealed like a child whose toy had been taken away. "But I'm pregnant," she screamed. "We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw a pregnant woman out on the street. You should have thought about that before choosing Mexico over my son's funeral," I said with ruthless calm. Emma looked at me, and then her face twisted with anger, as if something inside her had snapped, like overheated glass. "I know what it is," she hissed, her voice cold and alien. "You're just jealous because I'm expecting a baby and yours is dead." The room went dead silent, so silent that it seemed as if the air had stopped. Even David, who had been keeping to himself until now, looked shocked, his eyes wide and his mouth hanging open. But he didn't say a word. Emma went on. "You've gone crazy over Tommy's death, and now you're taking it out on me because I'm pregnant and happy and you're not, because I'm moving on and you're stuck in your grief. And to be honest, Tommy wasn't much of a child anyway." I felt something icy squeeze my chest, as if my heart had turned to stone. "Get out!" I screamed, louder than I'd ever screamed in my life, my voice breaking and echoing off the walls. "All of you! Get out of my house right now!" My mother tried to take control of the situation, throwing up her hands and stepping forward, as if hoping to defuse the tension. "Bianca, Emma is right. You're not thinking clearly right now, you're grieving, You're making decisions that will cause irreparable harm to our family. I'm calm, I said, walking to the door and opening it wide. I'm calmer than I've been in months. And if Emma thinks I'm crazy, she probably shouldn't be around me. Go away, my mother froze, but she didn't seem ready to give in just yet. What about all that money? She blurted out, and in that moment everything fell into place. This was the real reason they were here, not because they missed me, not because they repented, not because they wanted me back in the family, no, because I stopped paying their bills. You can't just cut off our financial support, we depend on it. I looked her straight in the eye and said, your car insurance, your supplements, your credit card payments, Emma's phone bill, her car payment, her gym membership, all of it, it's all cancelled. Now you're alone. Mom started crying, really crying, silently, tears streaming down her face, her hand covering her mouth, her voice shaking. Bianca, please, we can't afford this, we're retired, we're on a fixed income. You had $8,000 for a vacation to Mexico, I said, looking at her with icy determination. Sort it out. They stood there. And I saw how in their eyes either confusion or self-pity was replaced by irritation. Finally, they left. Emma was still shouting as she walked down the path, threatening to hire a lawyer, that I have no right, that it's unfair. I closed the door behind them, turned the key in the lock, and in that same second I felt lighter than I had in years. 2 weeks passed surprisingly peacefully, in a silence that I had previously considered ominous, but now accepted as a long-awaited respite, like a breath of fresh air after a long stay in a stuffy room full of forced smiles, grievances, spoken and unspoken words. They tried to get through to me, they called and texted from different numbers, left voicemails, sent emails, but I ignored it all, blocked it, deleted it, as if I was cutting out the remains of rotting tissue that no longer had the right to be a part of my life. I didn't open the door when they came, didn't look in the window, didn't answer their knocks. My silence was louder than any of their hysterics. And then Emma, as expected, made a mistake. She couldn't restrain her pride and went to a place where everything can be put on display, where attention is more important than the truth, where likes are equal to the truth. She wrote a long post on Facebook, full of feigned pain and poisonous falsehood, in which she told me what a cruel, vindictive person I was, how I threw my pregnant sister out on the street, how I deprived my aging parents of the support they counted on, and all this, because they allowed themselves to go on holiday. In her version of events, I was the monster who had had a breakdown, the monster who had destroyed family ties in her own grief. Her friends, not knowing the full truth, began to vent their anger in the comments. How could she do this to her pregnant sister? Pregnant women need support, not hostility, they wrote, unaware of the circumstances or the timeline. But then other voices began to appear in the comments, the voices of people who knew what really happened, people who had been to David's funeral and knew who was missing, people who remembered Tommy had died. They weren't at Tommy's funeral, wrote Mrs. Rodriguez, his teacher, who had driven an hour to say goodbye to the boy and couldn't believe his grandparents and aunt had chosen the beach instead. People started putting things together, asking questions, delving into the past, picking apart the pretty shell of Emma's words, neighbors, colleagues, church-goers, family friends. And finally I wrote one comment, short, reserved, brutally honest. Emma, you're right, our family relationships are really damaged. They were damaged when you, David, Mom and Dad chose a vacation instead of going to my 12-year-old son's funeral. You said that his death was my problem, not yours, and that your vacation was more important than saying goodbye to Tommy. I hope Mexico was worth it. The comments exploded. People were shocked, appalled, indignant. Emma's post did not cause the resonance she had hoped for, and a few hours later she deleted it, but it was too late. Screenshots were all over the internet. People no longer bought into Emma's victim image, and she could not hide behind her pregnancy and tears. 6 months have passed since then. I haven't spoken to any of them, and I don't plan to. I rented David's flat to a nice, polite young couple who, for the first time in a long time, paid market rent without questions or feigned gratitude. I quit my job, determined to finally do what David and I had talked about so much: travel, discover the world, soak up foreign streets, smells, tastes, landscapes, while I still have the strength, while I still have the opportunity, while nothing holds me back. I've been to Ireland, standing on the cliffs of Moher, catching the breath of the wind, to Italy, eating pasta under the open sky in a small Sicilian town, to Japan, walking through temple gardens, Breathing in the scent of plum blossoms, now I'm writing these lines in a small cafe on a side street in Prague's old town, next to a window where tourists, couples in love, children with ice cream slowly pass by. When this trip is over, I'm moving to Colorado. I've always loved the mountains, their silence, their grandeur, the way they embrace solitude without making it harder, but instead clothe it in peace, and there's nothing holding me back in my hometown anymore. No home, no family, no illusions. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family, and I answer honestly, no. I miss the family I thought I had, the warmth, the love, the support I pictured in my mind, but that family never existed, and the one that chose sand and margaritas over my child's freshly dug grave, no, I don't miss that at all. I'm 38 now, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm truly free of other people's demands, free of false closeness, free of those who took my kindness for granted, free of comfort over love, free of profit over compassion. Free to build a new life in a new place, among new people who will truly care about me because they want to, and not because I owe them something. Write a comment what you think about this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and put a like. See you soon.